Trek Profiles Podcast, episode 49, recorded February 2021. This is the Trek Profiles Podcast, where each episode we sit down with a Trek fan, we learn their story, and we try to figure out why this fandom matters to us so much. I'm John, your intrepid host of this whole enterprise, and I welcome you to this, the Trek Profiles Podcast, episode 49. If you want to get in touch with us, you can reach us at feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter at TrekProfiles. Warning, warning. As we record this, we have reached the end of Season 3 of Star Trek Discovery, so all previous Trek content up to and including that point is fair game and may be discussed during this episode. You have been warned, human. As always, my trusty sidekick and co-host is the always attentive, sometimes permissive, but never dismissive M5 Multitronic unit. Greet the listeners, M5.
M5 ready.
All right, M5, what's the news?
News posted.
This show is an independent podcast. If you'd like to support us, the best way to do that is to subscribe via your preferred podcasting platform. As I will do at the beginning of every year, I humbly ask for your donations to our favorite charity here on the show, and that's the Children's Fund for Glycogen Storage Disease, or GSD. I talked about GSD on episode 34 and how it affects my family and what it's all about. So if you like this show, and you'd like to show your support, and if you're in a financial position to do so, please consider a donation. There is a link for a donation in the show notes for this episode, as well as links for a donation up at TrekProfiles.com. Thank you so much for even considering it. I really do appreciate it. It means a lot to me. There are some lightly edited outtakes and bonus material at the end of this episode. They will come after the ending audio cards. Enjoy them, or not, as you choose. It's time to review the Kobayashi Maru feedback from episode 46 with Thad Haight. As a reminder, folks, I end every interview that I do with 5 multiple-choice lightning round questions, and I call it my Kobayashi Maru. So after each episode drops, I tweet those out, and they're Twitter polls where you can have your say, so follow me there if you want to weigh in. Okay, let's get to it. Which would you rather visit, Utopia Planitia Fleet Yards or visit San Francisco Fleet Yards? Both Thad and all of you agreed on Utopia by 71 to 29%. Neelix has dessert for you. Take your pick, Jabalian Fudge Cake or Sweet Leola Root Tart. Fudge Cake was the wide favorite of both the guests and the audience by 79 to 21%. Battle of the Captains. Learn archaeology from Picard or learn cooking from Sisko? Thad wanted to learn about archaeology, but the listeners wanted to cook up something with Sisko by 57 to 43%. Time for a vacation. Take your pick from these two, Sigma Draconis or Barzan 2. Sigma Draconis was the choice of everyone by 80 to 20%. And finally, which is worse, misaligned rank pips or incorrect Delta badge placement? Thad felt that misplaced rank pips were the worst, but the audience was more concerned about incorrect badge placement by 58 to 42%. That's it for messages, communiques, news, and weather. Let's move on. M5, roll it.
M5 working.
His favorite regular is Spock, but he also loves that visiting Klingon core, and his favorite ship is the original Enterprise, and he's currently rewatching all of the Trek all the time. He's in the UK, just outside London, on Earth, in Sector 001. It's Ben Robinson. Welcome, Ben, and thanks for being on the podcast.
It's a pleasure.
Ben, are you a Star Trek fan?
Yeah, I think I'd have to say so. I'd say, yeah. I'd go so far as to say I'm a professional Star Trek fan.
Oh, a professional. So you've taken it to the next level then.
I get paid. I get paid to be a Star Trek fan, yeah.
Oh, okay. Then I think we're going to be very jealous here. So please tell me how you began in Star Trek. Are you one of those people that like you've always watched the show and you don't remember a time before Star Trek, or did you get into it at some particular point in your life?
No, I'm the former. I really cannot remember the first time I saw Star Trek. I mean, the first specific memory I have of watching Star Trek was when I was on a holiday and they showed the same episode twice, and I was infuriated. I was like, the next week, and it's the same episode. It was worse because we were in this holiday cottage. It was in there were two cottages next to one another, and we were in one of them, and it only had a black and white TV. This is how long ago this was. Mm-hmm. Then the next week, we got access to the other half, which had a color TV. So I was so excited to watch Star Trek in color as it's meant to be. And they showed the same episode again. I think it was Jenny to Babel. So it was a good episode. But I was not happy. I was probably 6.
We've had people on the show before that were in situations where all they had was 2 episodes on videotape, and they just watched them over and over again because that's all they had. So it's a typical story for Star Trek fans of a certain age, I would say. Mm-hmm. So this was obviously TOS, I'm just guessing.
Oh, yes. There wasn't any other Star Trek when I was growing up. I didn't even realize they weren't still making it. I remember one of the more traumatic moments of my childhood. I was buying a magazine. I bought a Star Trek poster magazine, which I subsequently learned was published by Doug Drexler. And it had an interview with William Shatner, and it said, you stopped making the series 7 years ago, whatever it was. And I was like, my God, what? They've stopped making it? This is terrible. There's a limited number of episodes of Star Trek, and that was very traumatic for me.
And so I assume then this was in the UK.
It was. It was in Gloucestershire, Hobbitland.
Okay, so you were watching TOS, and at some point, I imagine they came out with TNG. Mm-hmm. Were you excited?
Yeah, very excited. I mean, obviously, they made a few movies first. But yes, I mean, TNG was a big deal. And I think people tend to forget that there had been no decent sci-fi at all. I mean, now we're ruined, we're spoiled. You're like, oh, The Mandalorian's over, but The Expanse is starting. In 1987, it was like, but there has been no good science fiction since 1969. I mean, that's a little unfair. We had Doctor Who in the UK.
Yeah.
Star Trek was the only game for a lot of people. The Star Trek and Doctor Who were the only real sci-fi. There was a bit of... There were things that were in reruns, so you'd have your Space 1999s, or
sure.
I don't know how much this travel, but your incomprehensible Sapphire and Steel.
Oh no, I'm not familiar with that one.
Oh, Sapphire and Steel is kind of mind blowing. It's too difficult to explain. It's completely incomprehensible. English people of my age would be able to start reciting the opening titles to you. It was Joanna Lumley.
Oh, wonderful!
And Dave McCallum. So. Both people would be familiar with from other shows, basically.
I typically enjoy giving people examples of shows like that to watch. I mean, just an example that's outside the realm of sci-fi. There's a Tom Hardy film, of course, actor who's been on Star Trek, and he was in a film called Locke. I don't know if you ever saw it.
I have, yes.
But I love explaining that film to people and telling them they should watch it because it's a guy who's in his car for 2 hours and he makes cell phone calls. It's a tremendous film. You should watch it.
It is. I saw it in the cinema. I really enjoyed it. Tom Hardy is one of those actors you could just watch driving a car for 2 hours.
And making cell phone calls. Yeah. And that's it. That's the whole movie. I didn't leave anything out, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely not. Nothing left out. It's a good film. It's a very good film.
That's right. So anyway, I assume then that you've watched all the new Star Trek from like the movies all the way up through TNG as it came out for the most part?
Yeah, not just for the most part, religiously. There are some episodes of Star Trek I've only seen once, I think. Not many. And, I've been fortunate enough through work to have talked to the people who worked on them, made them. So, I've pretty much been there since about 1973 or 1974. I've been there. I eventually discovered there were only 79 episodes of the original series. Mm-hmm. I've seen all of those several times. Still struggle to get through The Lights of Zetar or And the Children Shall Lead. Those are not my favorite episodes. But, I have watched all Star Trek as it has arrived. Sometimes before, I've been lucky enough to have seen it before it's arrived.
So you are confident that you've seen it all?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Repeatedly.
Fantastic. Now, have you been to any conventions, sci-fi conventions or Star Trek conventions in particular? Now, I know that we've actually met at one of those, so...
Yeah, so it's a moot question. I've been working on Star Trek for 23 years, 24 years, something like that this year, on and off, done some other things. But about 10 years ago, we finally worked out how to do things properly in the US, and we started releasing the ships, which is probably what most people know me for. And we launched those at Vegas, at Creation. Mm-hmm. So that was... European conventions are a little different. They're certainly not on the same scale as Creation. Yeah, so went to Creation, and then always had the problem of Creation and Comic-Con being too close to one another, and it being really difficult. If you're coming out from London, you can't stay. It's too long to stay between the two for work, so always having to choose. one or the other. But certainly I've been to Creation, I think, for the last 3 or 4 in a row, for sure. I think I missed last year. Everybody missed last year.
Yeah.
I missed the year before that because I went to Comic-Con instead. But yeah.
No, but in your personal capacity, like before you even got involved with EagleMoss and all of that, had you gone to any?
I went to, the conventions in England used to be very different. I remember, name dropping here. I remember telling this to Ira Bear.
No worries.
And he was like, what? He was like, what used to happen was that people in England used to go to conventions so they could see episodes.
Mm-hmm.
Because what would happen is that someone would come over from the US with a VHS tape with the episodes that had not yet aired or been available to buy on VHS in the UK. So when you went to a convention, you would suddenly be like, there are 8 episodes I haven't seen that I can watch in this weekend. And everyone would pack into these viewing rooms to do that. I mean, the guests, without wanting to do anybody down, I mean, the guests weren't on the level of, William Shatner or John Delancey or Joe Ryan, but just the opportunity to get together with a bunch of other people and watch episodes you hadn't seen was very exciting.
Oh, I can only imagine. I know that feeling a little bit. A show that I've talked about frequently here on Trek Profiles that's outside the realm of Star Trek is Babylon 5. And I watched that in original airing, and there was a whole portion of season 4 that aired first in the UK before it aired here. And so this is when the internet was around. It was in its beginning stages, but it was around, and there was internet and message boards and email zines and all this kind of stuff. And so I got to experience the other side of that typical situation where we get everything first over here. So I know exactly how it feels, believe it or not. So have you ever done a cosplay at all?
No. That for me, I mean, I just couldn't. I'm a very serious and English, stiff upper lip, prudish type of person. And I've always had a thing about the way the media presents Star Trek fans. And for me, cosplay is fun, but it's always been a kind of, I know it's kind of in the English media for sure, it's kind of a stick that's used to beat people. Mm-hmm. It's like all those strange Star Trek fans who put on their fake ears and do all of that. And I've always, as I say, I've always been a bit stiff about such things. So cosplay is not for me. Nothing wrong with it. I have a lot of respect for people who do it, but it's, outside my comfort zone. Having said that, I hate the idea of fancy dress parties as well. So I'm really not the person for it.
Well, fair enough. I had on the show Noah Averbach-Katz, who of course was in Star Trek in Discovery in season 3. And he's married to Mary Wiseman, of course. And one of the things he told me is that when she got the part, when she was first cast in Star Trek, he sat her down and he said, okay, you have to watch this documentary called Trekkies to understand what you're getting into. And so I could see you putting your head to one side and rolling your eyes there, Ben. So it's sort of there's a lot of the stereotype that you're talking about.
Exactly.
In that film.
No, at the same time that was being made, they could have gone and talked to Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking visited the SAT, and I think one of the most moving things I've heard is that he said to them, would you mind taking me out of my wheelchair and putting me in the captain's chair?
Yeah.
And I was talking about seeing TNG on VHS. I don't know if you know this, they published a VHS cover. And on the cover, there's a picture of the Dalai Lama. And this was very puzzling. You just watch the episode and there's no character that looks anything like the Dalai Lama or anything like that. And what had happened is the Dalai Lama had been visiting the sets and they had taken his photograph. And when the VHS company, who obviously knew nothing about Star Trek, had got it, they'd seen these men in these robes and just assumed that they were the visiting aliens of the week. So had stuck them on the front cover of the VHS.
I'm going to have to find a photo of that online and link to it in the show notes, because I had not ever seen that before. So that's great. And I'm sure that that's out there somewhere. So I'm going to have to find that.
Oh, I'm sure. I've probably got the VHS somewhere in my loft.
So are you a collector, Ben?
Only really of books and concept art. And then the concept art, I do have a few original pieces kind of by accident. But what I really have is like a massive digital collection. And it's something that I'm kind of obsessed by.
So like technical drawings, concept art, walk me through it. What do you got?
I think I have every book, non-fiction book that's ever been published about Star Trek. Some of that's professional interest, but to be honest, I had them before anyway. I've always bought those. And then concept art, one of the things that's always fascinated me is how something came to be the way it is. Mm-hmm. Not just that it is, but what could it have been? How could it have been different? What was it like? And when you go to the art department, the art department obviously draw up. I mean, they used to literally do it. Matt Jeffries used to do it with a pencil on the back of a napkin or in a sketchbook, mm-hmm. Draw up their ideas for how something might work. And then they would develop it. And back in the day, this would be physical. So, John Eaves would be there doing it with his blue line and then photocopying it and drawing over it and adjusting the design. Now it's all done in 3D modeling and Photoshop type stuff. But I have literally thousands of pieces of concept art. So either something that came very close to being the final version or rejected directions that were abandoned. And we publish quite a lot of that in books, but that is really just because I'm obsessed by it.
I was looking at your site and some of the prep that I do for this, and I saw that you actually have the original Reliant concept, which I think is interesting. So why don't you regale us with that story for those who haven't heard it?
Well, the story about this. So when they came to do Star Trek 2, there was no money left. Hal Bennett tells a story about how he was called in after the first Star Trek film. And he went in to see Charlie Bloodhorn, who was the head of Paramount Studios, and he said, did you see Star Trek motion picture? And I said, yeah. He said, what did you think? And Harv's there thinking, oh, God, what do I say? Because I didn't like the film at all. And what do I say? And I said, well, I thought it was a bit slow. I thought it was a bit dull. And Charlie said to him, could you do something better? And he said, yeah. He said, could you do it for less than $45 million? To which Harv responded, yeah, I could make you 4 films for that money. So where was I? Oh, yes. So then the Reliant. So there was no money. But so the point was Harv agreed to do it for virtually no money. And everything they did had to be done as cheaply as possible. They reused a lot of the visual effect shots from the first film. Mm-hmm. And the decision was made to make the Reliant a kind of cut down version of the original Enterprise. But when they did it, originally, it was the other way up. So the nacelles was still above the saucer, just didn't have a secondary hull. And they sent the drawings to Harv, and he was literally I think he was actually abroad. This was a sign of how long ago it was. So they FedExed him the drawings. He signed the drawings and sent them back, saying they were approved. When they got the drawings back, they realized that he'd signed them upside down. And they were like, what do we do? We don't know which way up he wants it to be. So they're like, well, he signed it this way up. He was abroad back in the day. It was too difficult to just get a hold of him again. So they flipped the ship and put it the other way up. And that's when they added the roll bar as well. So what we've done is a model of the original drawings they sent to Harv before he signed them upside down.
I think that story just encapsulates everything that goes into what you were talking about why concept art is so appealing. Because you get to see the evolution of these things, and you also get to see that sometimes they dive into that stuff and come back with it. I mean, the Discovery ship was concept art for an Enterprise at one point, right? And yet here it is. Now it's its own show with its own ship, right? It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's Ken Adam. So everyone always says that it's Ralph McQuarrie, but it's actually Ken Adam, who's the famous Bond production designer who came up with the design. I mean, McQuarrie came along and did some concept paintings, but the actual design was Ken Adam. And yeah, and Brian Fuller had seen that in the art of Star Trek and knew that it was an abandoned direction. But I mean, and then when you see how many abandoned directions there are for the Discovery, it's like beyond belief how many drawings they did for that ship.
So then talk to me about how you were just a personal Star Trek fan, and then you got into the actual business of Star Trek and actually started working for a Star Trek adjacent business and got into EagleMoss. Walk me through how all that happened.
So I had this, profound interest in Star Trek. And then there was an advert. There's a newspaper in Britain called The Guardian, which is where all the kind of media jobs are advertised. And it said, have you got a bit of experience working in publishing? And do you know a lot about Star Trek? And I thought, well, yes, on both those counts. I'd been working in publishing for a couple of years at that point. I was working on, God, it shows you how long ago it was. I was working on interactive CD-ROMs. That's a different world.
I remember purchasing a few interactive CD-ROMs, some of the Star Trek variety as well.
Well, this was even before those were available. This was Dorling Kindersley. So I'd worked on Eyewitness Dinosaur. And the job came up and I thought, well, I'll apply. And I applied and it turned out to be something called Star Trek Fact Files, which I don't know, a lot of the art that we commissioned is still kicking around on the internet. I always describe it to people as the paper version of Memory Alpha. It ended up being, I think we did 10,000 pages. I mean, I didn't work on all of those. And that was a big success. And then in order to publish it in the US, we took a license to have the US Star Trek magazine. So I spent, it was published for 4 years, but I spent 5 years because we had to get it set up, interviewing people and just basically deciding what I wanted to put in the magazine and who I wanted to talk to, which was an extraordinary privilege. And then, I went on to the company I was working for folded, but the people who've been actually publishing it took me on. I worked on a load of other stuff. I worked on James Bond, Doctor Who, X-Files, all manner of other things. And then, Star Trek was always there in the background and came back around. And eventually we launched the ships, which is now 9 years ago. It's a long time we've been making ships.
Goodness gracious. And I imagine the production process has changed quite a bit over that time. I mean, at some point, I imagine you were trying to recreate things, but now as an official licensee, I bet you're just getting the digital files and it makes it so much easier, or am I off base here?
No, that was always the gag. I mean, we started out looking at doing a figurine collection, which we tested and didn't go ahead. There are various challenges to do with figurines. So it mostly comes down to the quality of your sculptors. The better your sculptors are, the better your figurines or statues will be. But while we were doing it, we realized that we could make the ships incredibly accurate because we could get the original CG files. So, I was working on the magazine, on the fact files, when Star Trek made the transition from the practical motion control stuff to CG. So I knew all the guys who had worked at Foundation or at Eden Digital News, and I knew they had the model assets and I could get them. They didn't actually ever get officially archived to CBS channels, so I've been gradually piecing everything back together from when I worked on it, and actually now occasionally help out the production by sending them back their own files.
Yeah, I've heard stories like that before of like various, Star Trek collectors who are out there that have pieces of things, and then the production actually gets in touch and says, hey, do you have this? So we can come and look at it and, match a color or a particular button or something like that. And, there's this virtuous circle between the collectors out there and the production, which I think is great that people are willing to help them out.
Yeah, and they're all lovely people. We do talk to them about it, so it's been really nice thing to do.
So one of the questions I have, because I'm not much of a collector, Ben, I'm going to be honest with you. I have some EagleMoss ships. I have a couple of this or that, but I'm not a huge collector. In fact, behind me on the wall, you can see a few things I have here. I got my Royal Mail Star Trek stamps. I got my U.S. Mail Star Trek stamps. I got some original art, and a Spock painting back there. So I'm not all that up on this stuff, but I just want to understand the contours of how it works. So obviously people can subscribe and buy the subscription for the ships, or they can purchase any of the ships as a one-off. But I imagine there's only certain production windows. So if they don't buy a ship within a certain period of time, it might go out of stock and they're out of luck. Is that right?
Yes, that's pretty much it. I mean, so far, there isn't anything that we have decided we will never make again. But what happens is you have to reach a certain number of orders before it becomes realistic to make it again. So, if you only make 10, then it costs an awful lot.
Yeah.
You couldn't afford to sell it to anyone on that basis. One of the exercises we've been talking about is going through the stock and through the list and saying, look, okay, guys, we're never going to make this again. It's just the reality of it. It's a mail on garbage scale. It's like everybody who wants that has had their chance to buy it. In contrast, if you're talking about an Enterprise or Voyager or Defiant or something like that, then of course we're going to make it again. It might be out of stock for a bit, but it will come back at some point.
So the Mail-On fans out there better get on the ball.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, they'll be relegated to the secondary market.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want a Mail-On garbage scow or some of the more obscure Voyager ships or something like that, then yeah, you probably ought to buy that now. If you think about it, think how many other people would want this. If the answer is lots, then you're probably safe. If it's like, yeah, I think I'm in a fairly select group of people who want this, then now is probably the best time to buy it. Or you get scalped on eBay.
I know for myself, if I was to get into this, I would have to buy 2 of everything. One to take out of the box and to look at, and one to keep in the box. And I just know it would become a tremendously addictive habit, which would be good for you, but not so good for me.
Well, yeah, it depends how much space you have as well. You have to be prepared to build a wall with those boxes now.
What is your favorite model that you've come out with? And I'm not even referring to your favorite ship, but I'm just saying, that you look at that model and you think, wow, that really brought to life that ship. Like, we did a really good job with that.
There is that kind of magical moment sometimes when you open the box, because you get a box from China and you've approved it in 3D form and you've said what color to paint it and all of that, but you don't really know what it's like until you open the box and see it. I always say this, so it's boring, But the original series Enterprise, when we opened the box, it was like, okay, that is just spot on. And Gary Kerr, who's the most knowledgeable man in the world about the original series Enterprise, gave us a lot of help with that. And, he gave us the exact color and, the correct position of all the windows and all of that. So it was an extraordinary moment, that, for me. And because of, I'm an original series fanboy, so there was something very, very real about it. And I kind of thought, I feel like Sylvia and Coral,
So let's talk about that for a second, because there are different variations of even the original series Enterprise in the show. Like there's the flat back nacelles that have sort of that diagonal shape, and then the ball. There's the ones with the spikes on the front of the nacelles.
Yes, but the titles, the Enterprise changes. The back of the nacelles changes in the titles in the original series, not in the remastered one.
Right. So how did you decide which one to make?
Well, it's a very good question. We went with the one that initially, because we've done a couple of different ones now. We went with a kind of end of season 1, beginning of season 2 look, on the grounds that that's what Gene Matt intended the ship to look like. So there were changes between the pilots and there were changes between the pilots, and then there were changes between Where No Man's Gone Before and first episodes that were actually shot, called My Maneuver. And Gene refined the model once he had a little bit more money, and there were things that he wanted to do. So like changing from the kind of grill pattern on the back to changing to the sphere was a change that he asked for because he wanted to change the design. But originally that sphere was meant to light up like the Busan collectors on the front.
Oh, nice.
But they couldn't afford it. So, it got ditched. But that was the hope. So that was the version that we went with. Obviously, they lowered the profile of the bridge and they'd taken the antenna off the front of the nacelles as well. And that's the one that we've done as our XL version. I'm now thinking that I've got this wrong and that we did the nacelles with the grill pattern, because we did do those as well for a different release.
So when you're trying to make something for the fan community, which obviously that's your target market, that's my target market for this podcast here, one of the things I think you have to struggle with is their expectations versus the reality. And I want to understand your approach here. So an example I'll give, and this may or may not be a real example, you'll have to educate me, but let's just think about, since you brought up the original series Enterprise, let's just talk about that gray color. If you were to go visit the model and look at that color, it might be a little different than what would appear on TV screens.
Yes.
So when you're trying to make the model, like, where are you trying to come down on that? And how are you trying to square that circle? Are you trying to match the expectations of what people expect because that's what they saw on TV? Or are you trying to match the original color, which might not be representative of what people saw?
Okay, so this is a very complicated subject, which I can talk at great length. For me, what people saw on screen is what's real. So if you take the Enterprise D as a really good example of this, Andy Probert wanted it to be blue. His idea was that the model was blue. And in fact, this was because in the original series, where you had like difficulty with the compositing and you had a little bit of blue spill light around the edge, and he wanted to suggest that that wasn't bad compositing. It was actually a side effect of the engines.
Oh, right.
The visual effects team didn't like that idea at all because they thought it just looked like bad compositing.
Because they're too close to it. That's the issue, right? It's just like if you're a magician and you go to a magic show, you can't enjoy it because you see all the things, right? And you're like, oh, I see what he's doing, right? And so you can't appreciate it. Whereas someone who's not, they're like, oh, this is great. Just use it.
Yeah, I think personally, I'd probably slightly more on Rob Legato's side on this particular argument. And so they changed the color. And also what would happen, my favorite example of this, is that when you see the Jem'Hadar bug, the little fighter, you see that model in photographs. Not that I've ever seen it in person. Actually, I have seen it in person. It's really colourful.
Okay.
It is blue and purple and all sorts of colours. And when you see it on screen, it's kind of like this little silver scarab kind of thing. And that was done deliberately for technical reasons. So what would happen is, Gary Hutzel told me, it was easier for them to composite it if it had the colour in it. It was easier for them to sort of see it, to pull the mats, to do that. And then they would just dial the colour down to make it look different on screen. But the colour was useful to have it there, stronger than it actually was in the end product. So in that case, the model does not look the way I imagine anyone in the Star Trek universe ever saw that chip looking. So you had to find a little compromise because you know that colour's actually there. So we wanted to hint to those colours, but you didn't want to make something, when you think of a Jem'Hadar fighter, you do not think of a blue and purple thing. That is just, I defy anybody. That is not it doesn't look like that on screen.
But that is what the model looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. It really does. I mean, that's something you can Google and see. So I think the other thing that upsets people is that you have to realize that the ships aren't always the same color on screen, because the visual effects team would tweak the color to match the situation it was in. They're like, oh, we want it to look dark and moody. Let's make it a little darker, a little moodier. We can do that. We've got control of this. Or we want it to look bright and optimistic. Let's do that. We've got control. So they could turn the color up or down or whatever. It's even more extreme with digital models. With the Aztec pattern, they have, what they do is quite often it's literally the same color, but the Aztec pattern is more reflective than the base color. And what they do sometimes is turn that reflectiveness up to make it catch the light, or other times they turn it down to stop it catching the light. So, it's not quite real.
But it sounds like that as a company that's trying to make these things, you're actually trying to go for more the screen version than the reality of what the model looks like.
100%. 100%. That's the case. Yeah.
Totally understood. Because, it's funny. I probably the biggest example of this that I can think of is all the controversy around what's the color of those command shirts in TOS. Right. There's a whole thing. And if anybody out there wants to go down a rabbit hole, you can actually find out like whether it's green, whether it's gold, whether it's mustard. It depends on whether you're looking at the actual shirt and what kind of light and how it translates through the TV. And there's a whole thing you can dive into there. It's really crazy. So I would encourage people to go do that. But Ben, I have to tell you, the M5 is telling me that we should dive in and talk about a couple episodes. Are you game?
I am.
All right. So as always, my co-host did a little bit of gentle internet sleuthing and also a couple of emails with you. And we came up with this list of episodes that we feel we should talk about. I'm really excited to get into some of these with you because there's a few of them have never come up on the show before, which is always a very exciting thing for me. So let's start with one of those. Let's talk about Metamorphosis, the original series, season 2. Episode 2. Here we have the original version of Zefram Cochrane. There was a little bit of Soviet revisionism done on him at one point. So there's sort of a Rev 2 Zefram, but here we have Rev 1 Zefram and, of course, Commissioner Hedford, who's dying of a terrible disease. And we have the companion. So what about this episode comes to mind when you think about it, Ben? What's special about it?
It's a classic piece of Gene Coon writing. It's very, very Star Trek in its concerns, I think. It's about prejudice. It's about love. It's about alienness and what are the essences of something. And it's about hope, I think, as well. And redemption. My God, it makes I mean, it's all those good things. And it has a kind of mythic quality to it as well. I think, Star Trek is kind of from a modern myth. Mm-hmm. And this is very much a kind of mythical kind of tale. The girl who was turned into a cloud, or the cloud who was turned into a girl in this case. Yeah, it just has lots and lots of things I love about Star Trek, including glowy cloud alien type beings.
One of the things I enjoy about this episode, well, enjoy is the wrong word, but one of the things I note as I watch it is that there's this sense among the fans, broadly speaking, and I hate to characterize, but I feel that this is right. There's a feeling among the fans that the Federation and Star Trek is utopian. But as I look at specific episodes, especially original series episodes, I feel that the message of Star Trek is very anti-utopia in a lot of ways. And I think this is an example of that, in that you can't have immortality. You have to give that up to have a life that's worth living, in a way, which is a strong part of this, the resolution of this episode, right? Is that she gives up all the immortality and all the power, right, to live this life.
For love.
Yeah, for love with Zefram Cochrane, right? And you see this, like, there's multiple examples of where Kirk comes across a wonderful society, and he's like, you can't have this, right? This is no good.
It's normally, I mean, I completely agree with you that it's not utopian in the way that we started to think about it when TNG came back. And I think that Gene spent a lot of the 70s thinking about why Star Trek had been successful. And one of the conclusions he came to was that it showed you a better future. That, the future, all those dystopian futures, all those I love Blade Runner, but I don't want to live there.
Yeah, Soylent Green was like a big film at the time, right? And that's sort of the future that people expected.
Definitely don't want to live there, So I think, Gene came to the conclusion that the optimism of Star Trek and the possibility that humanity would get better was a big part of its appeal. But when you look at the original series, the characters are still on that journey. They're still learning to be better. And that frequently happens in the course of an episode. One of my other favorite episodes is Errand of Mercy, where I think we might even get to it later. It has this brilliant ending where the Organians are saying, we're going to stop you fighting one another. And Kurt's going, but we have the right to make war. And then he kind of catches himself and goes, oh, okay, maybe that's a stupid thing to say. And to me, those moments of realization, those moments of understanding are what Star Trek at its best delivers. And sometimes it's realizing you have to let either die. Sometimes it's realizing that having the right to wage war is not a very useful right to have at all. Or it's realizing that however different this cloud creature might appear to be, it's capable of loving and of being loved. For me, that's what Star Trek, when it at its best, that's what it delivers.
Wonderful. Then let's talk about Errand of Mercy. You brought up one of my favorite scenes in the episode, which is when Kirk and Kor are basically yelling at Eilborn and the rest of the Organian committee, leadership council, saying, we have the right to kill each other. And really, with just a few words changed, it really is the same scene as like a bunch of kids on the playground going to the teacher. It's that exact same thing. He started it. No, he started it, right?
Yeah.
It really is no different than that. And it really puts the characters in sort of that, they really are being childlike, talking to the adults. And the Organians are the adults here and are arbitrating this scenario and laying down the law, right? You go to your room, and don't come out until I tell you.
Stop killing people.
Yeah, stop killing people. And then we don't hear about it really ever again until Enterprise, really, when they do sort of their retcon.
There's a brief mention in Trouble Tribbles. They are there under the terms of the Organian peace treaty.
Right. I've forgotten that. Very good.
So, yeah, what happened to the Organians? I guess that's a good question for the writers of TNG is what point did the Organians go, okay, we'll just leave you to it? Maybe they decided to ascend to a higher plane or something.
There's books about it that talk about this, and there's been some speculative stuff that people have written about it, that like it wasn't even actually real, or they couldn't do what they did outside their system, so like it was all a bluff. People can look at that stuff. And I've had this discussion on the show before, but I think that Star Trek has never promised, as part of the premise of the show, a completely thought out, iron-fisted canon for how everything works. And strong show continuity. That's never a promise they've made. They've never written that check, but man, the fans are out there trying to cash it all the time. And I tell them, it's a bad idea. Stop it.
Certainly, I was, telling you about my childhood. When they made the series in the 60s, they never thought that anyone would see these episodes again.
Yeah.
There's, I can't remember what his name is, one of the, they used the same supporting cast as much as they could for the extras and for the stuntmen. One of them, he gets killed, and he thought, oh dear, that's it, I'm off. But then they call him again the next week and call him back.
Yeah, Mr. Leslie? Was that Mr. Leslie?
Yeah, I don't know if it's Mr. Leslie. I think it's one of the other. But anyway.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't really matter. That was the point, is it didn't matter who it was. So that idea that anybody would see it again, let alone complain.
Yeah, or expect a level of continuity that just wasn't part of the show.
But I think by the time you get to Next Gen, they are more aware, and they definitely, they do their best. But you can't ever let that continuity get in the way of telling a really good story. If you have a fantastic story and it has some minor contradiction in continuity, I say, yeah, forget it. Just, and besides which, people aren't 100% accurate in what they say when they're talking about no one ever having seen a Romulan. They might just mean there's nothing in the records that shows anyone's ever seen a Romulan, in Balance of Terror. It's quite possible that people had seen them, but they didn't record it.
Yeah.
There was no... And okay, it's Spock. He's normally right about things, but he's not absolutely strict. But then it gets, baked into canon, as you say, and then you can't have stories with Romulans in, which is a shame.
Which is a shame, because I think they're very interesting. All right. Well, you mentioned TNG, so let's talk about TNG. One of the episodes on the list, of course, is the series finale, All Good Things. That's season 7, episodes 25 and 26. Now, one of the peculiar things about an episode like this is that so much of it is alternative future that isn't actually part of what actually happens. So we're taking the characters or character and sort of putting them in this alternate future and going down these roads that actually don't go anywhere, and then we revert back. So it's a very interesting episode in that way, but I'm interested to you as to why it made the list as one of the most interesting or personally powerful episodes of Star Trek for you.
I think because it completes the circle. I mean, finishing any series and finding a satisfactory ending to it is an incredibly difficult thing to do. It's like, how do you pay it off? How do you leave people with that feeling that you want to leave them with? A feeling of completion, but also, leave the characters open enough because there's going to be a movie. In that case, they knew there was going to be a movie in a few months' time. So for me, it's the future is important in All Good Things, but it also shows the past. You get to see Picard coming onto the Enterprise for the first time, and you get to see Tasha being alive again, and you realize what a big thing it is for Picard that she's gone. This is, and for us as fans as well. It's a really clever script. It's a really clever story. And it also answers that speculation that a lot of people had about what will their futures be? What will happen? Because I'm not going to see it because there isn't an episode.
Right.
There isn't a season 8, episode 1. So, where might they be going? And I just think it's just one of those things that just came together and just works. And it's got that brilliant thing where he just says, the trial never ended. And you kind of go, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, of course.
It was a trial right from the beginning, right?
Yeah, and now everything I've seen for the last 7 years, I now see in a slightly different light. And I think that's a really neat trick if you can pull that off.
It's a very difficult thing, as you were talking about, to make a series finale that's satisfying and that wraps things up in a certain way. Some examples that I feel very strongly about in the negative are the shows Lost. I don't know if you ever saw that. And The Sopranos, both of which I was bitterly, bitterly disappointed in. And they have their defenders, and people certainly are entitled to those opinions. But my whole feeling about those shows took a nosedive and left me bitterly unsatisfied based on those finales.
Oh, it's true. It's true.
When you have one that makes you feel like that was a good, satisfying ending, right, to the show, it's a great thing to do.
Yeah, and as I say, really difficult thing to pull off.
One of the other things I actually enjoy about it, and this is sort of a minor point, which is being involved in the fandom as I am, when people speculate about the future of characters, it's always, we need to see this character as an admiral and that character, like everybody's an admiral, I think at the end of the day, in fans' minds.
Yeah.
And so I just like the idea that there's life outside of Starfleet. And that's one of the things I appreciate about the Picard show is that I think for the first time, we're actually seeing life in the Federation from a different lens than Starfleet, right? Because even in Deep Space Nine, the characters who were not in Starfleet, it was seen through the lens of, here's these ancillary characters seen through the lens of our Starfleet characters, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure that's entirely true about DS9. I think because you have the whole Bajoran thing, I wouldn't say, maybe at the very beginning, Kira is seen through Sisko's eyes, but that definitely changes over the course of 7 years, and even Quark, I think. But I take your point. I mean, the thing I feel very strongly on that is I always felt it was a mistake to make the Enterprise the flagship.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I always felt about the original series was it was great that there were lots of captains, and they were all really cool, and the Enterprise was just one ship in the fleet. There's a whole fleet of these guys out there.
Yeah.
And they're all off having their own equally interesting adventures, saving the universe as well. It's not just the Enterprise. It's not like everybody else was just like going to the farming planet or, doing the kind of lower deck stuff.
Absolutely. Well, then let's talk about another episode. Let's talk about The Defector. Season 3, Episode 10, the amazing James Sloyan guest stars as the secret defector Admiral Jarrok. So tell me, what about this episode was significant or special to you?
So for me, that was very personal. So I was very excited when Next Gen came back. I was 18 when it came back. And I went and got the VHSs and watched all of the first season. And then I went away to university and it got a little bit harder. And season 2 is very patchy. and I didn't see every episode exactly as it was broadcast. And I have to admit that I'd lost a bit of interest. My kind of mojo for Star Trek had gone a bit. I was doing my MA. I was sitting in the room and I thought, oh, Star Trek's on. I watched it, not having seen maybe 15, 20 episodes at that point. And it was the de facto. And I thought it was great. I loved it. And I thought, yeah, this is fantastic. And I started watching again and I went back and got all the other episodes. So it was the one that kind of, and then I discovered, how much better the series had become in series 3. So, it was personally, it was a big kind of rebirth in my Star Trek journey.
So it gave you the opportunity to reconnect.
Yeah, it did. Absolutely. And I also think it's a really good episode. I think, I love me a Romulan. I think there's still lots to be done with the Romulans. And I just thought it was really strong and really good.
One of the scenes that always jumps out at me, and it's such a minor moment in the episode, but for some reason it just really resonates with me, is when Data takes him into the holodeck and shows him that recreation of Romulus. And for just a second, he talks about his longing for home that he knows he'll never see again. I just found that very special and very powerfully acted and just really beautiful.
Yeah, and again, it's got that kind of mythic quality. It's got a kind of, Homeric quality of this sort of powerful general who is so disturbed by what he thinks is happening that he throws everything away in order to do what he thinks is right. I think it's a lesson for all of us, particularly at the moment.
Yeah.
That my country, right or wrong, is not a very good way to do the work.
Down that path lies some very dangerous situations for sure.
Yeah.
So let's continue talking about Romulans then. Let's talk about In the Pale Moonlight, Deep Space Nine, Season 6, Episode 19, in which our Starfleet heroes arrange the death of a Romulan official and basically take it upon themselves to get involved directly in foreign negotiations and foreign affairs of the United Federation of Planets.
Yeah.
Certainly a very risky bet, and certainly something that I think that if it were to happen in real life, people would be horrified by. I don't know. But tell me, what about this episode stuck out to you?
I think it's one of the most grown-up episodes of Star Trek. Sisko asks himself at the end of the episode, can I live with it? And he says, yeah, I think I can. He doesn't have any easy outs. Mm-hmm. It's based obviously on the idea that FDR knew that the Japanese were going to attack Pearl Harbor. I have no idea whether there's any truth to that or not. Probably not. But it was something that, if that's what it took to stop Hitler, then sometimes you have to let something terrible happen. And sometimes you have to do something that, maybe will give you difficulty sleeping at night. If you put your other Star Trek captains in Sisko's role and ask yourself what they would have done, would Kirk have done that? Yeah, I'm pretty sure he would. Would Picard? I think he probably would. I think he would have found it, pretty hard.
Picard is very much a moral relativist.
Yeah.
I think he would have. Kirk, I'm less convinced about, but Picard, I think he would have.
Kirk doesn't mind killing people. That's not quite fair. But if you think about balance of terror, Kirk pursues the Romulan ship in order to kill them, in order to prevent a war. Mm-hmm. That's his whole motivation. And I think Picard is interesting in terms of his moral absoluteness. When Michael Piller came on to Next Gen, so, one of episodes like The Factor that I love so much. Yeah. He wanted to create moral dilemmas for the characters. He wanted to create a situation where it's like, you don't really know what the right answer is. There's no simple solution to this. And that's what makes for a good drama, because you don't know what's going to happen, because you don't know what the correct solution is. When you think about, I, Borg, where Picard is all set to wipe out the Borg and then realizes that maybe that's going too far, that's genocide. It is grown up Star Trek. It's a very real question. What would you do? Can you live with it? You
talked about the example of sometimes allowing things to happen that are not so wonderful. The example that comes to my mind isn't Pearl Harbor, but it's actually an example I think that might be even more relevant for someone like you, if I might say, which is my old boss was an Englishman, and he was from the city of Coventry, and has a lot to say about that.
Yeah.
And it really is a situation where there are no good answers.
There's a fantastic film, it's a documentary called The Winds of War, which is about Robert McNamara, and he was responsible for the firebombing of Tokyo, which caused more death than the atomic bomb and caused more devastation. And he, orchestrated it because he thought it would end the war. sooner. And it probably did. But it killed a lot of innocent people. And that's the reality of war. I think we're all a little bit in a taste of Armageddon scenario now where everyone imagines that the war just affects soldiers. We complain about wars in which civilians get killed.
Yeah.
That's not the nature of war.
I think that's another reason that I seem to be so enraptured with the Picard show in a lot of ways, in that you're seeing the civilian side of the world. Because even in earlier Star Trek, whether Berman era or the TOS era, you're still looking at things through the lens of Starfleet, right? Through the officers and the people on the ships, right? And here you're sort of seeing it on the civilian side of things and sort of outside of that sort of structure. That's interesting to me.
It's definitely a very rich sort of area that's never been touched on. How many times have we seen Earth?
Yeah.
In all those years of Star Trek, we still don't really know very much about Earth. We cobble it all together. You probably got maybe an hour of material set on Earth.
As an interesting little bit of trivia, I was talking with someone, and one of the questions that we were talking about was, excluding the Discovery era and everything after Enterprise, how many times have we seen the inside of an actual person's home, not a Starfleet officer cabin? I'm sure that people out there can correct me, but one of the only examples I could think of was in Conscience of the King. We go down to the planet and we visit his friend who has the wound on his face. He's got the mask on. So we're inside their home. But, Zephyr Cochrane's place, and I don't think that really counts,
No.
That like his crashed ship. I don't know if that would count for anything. You don't actually get to see sort of what life is actually like for regular folks, in a lot of ways.
No, Cisco's dad. You go to the restaurant in New Orleans.
Yeah, we get to see the restaurant a couple of times.
You see the restaurant rather than the home.
Yeah, but you don't see the home. Mm-hmm.
You get to see more of Ishka's home. You see more of life on Ferenginar than you do of life on Earth.
Which is weird, right?
Yeah. Actually, and you see slightly more of life on the Klingon homeworld as well.
Or even on Vulcan.
Vulcan, yeah. Yeah, we have not seen a lot of life in the Federation for ordinary folk, for sure.
So let's talk about a Voyager episode. Let's talk about, this one has never come up on the show before. I'm pretty confident about that. I might be wrong, but I feel pretty strongly about that. And that's The Gift, Voyager Season 4, Episode 2. Mm-hmm. Here's where we have Kes basically having a Wesley moment and gaining thoughts about space and time and seeing beyond and getting beyond the subatomic. It's some really wild stuff. And of course, we also have 7 of 9 in her early appearance in the show as well. So what about this one is significant to you, Ben?
Well, everyone always thinks of Scorpion as the big reboot for Voyager. But actually, most of it happens in The Gift. The Gift is the episode in which 7 becomes 7. It's a reboot episode for Voyager. It changes everything. And Jerry Ryan's phenomenally good in it. It's a beautiful piece of Joe Meloski writing. Joe has an ability to write stories that leave you on the edge of your seat somehow. They just deliver these moments at the end that kind of make your skin tingle. There are just so many things in that episode that show you where Voyager is going to go after that. Janeway's saying, you can be human again. And Seven's saying, I don't want to be human again. You have taken me away from perfection. And this hurts. And this is what you are telling me it means. And Janeway's like, yes, this is what it means to be human. And it is better to be human than it is to be a book. And, they're both right. And that dynamic between the two actors is phenomenal and becomes the core of Voyager. This is the thing that drives the show forward from now on. Mm-hmm. It's one of the most exciting episodes of Star Trek because you get to the end and you go, I cannot wait to see what's coming now. I want to see this. Yeah, and the other story, the Cass departure story, we just published, wrote a good chunk along with Mark, my friend Mark Wright, this Voyager celebration book. Mm-hmm. And in that book, we talk a bit about why Jennifer Lee left. It's not quite the reasons that have been talked about. She had some problems, she had issues that are subsequently fairly well documented, but that made her very difficult to work with, made her very unreliable. And they very reluctantly decided that they had to lose the character. It wasn't a case of let's get rid of Cass and bring in Babe Borg. I was talking to Brian Fuller about this, and he said actually originally Cass was meant to stick around for most of the rest of the season, so there would have been a season that featured both Cass and 7 before Cass left. And Brian sent me like half a dozen story ideas. He was tasked with, how do we get rid of Kes? So he sent me all these, like, there were these other ideas of like, okay, Kes does this, Kes does that, Kes gets back to Earth, but nobody else does.
Oh my God, I think that's the worst idea I've ever heard. I don't think I would have liked that.
They didn't go for it. But I guess she, then she could have written a kind of recurring status character like Barclay trying to communicate with them or something like that.
Kes and Barclay would have been hanging out at the communications center. I don't know. I don't think I could handle that.
Yeah, and then she'd die in the last episode just before they got back because she'd be too old.
Goodness.
But I think that, I think it's actually quite a satisfying payoff for Kes. I think it's a little bit more satisfying than Wesley's ascension,
which he then comes back from.
I know.
It's not really explained.
Well, obviously, it's kind of dull being, an ascended being, and Kes didn't like it either. She comes back.
Yeah,
it's overrated. Hanging out with those Organians.
But it's a remarkable setup for the show. You're right about that, right? It really changes the course. This is sort of an inflection point for all of Voyager, if I understood you right.
Yeah, exactly that. And everyone always says, oh, we're in Scorpion when this happens. And I'm thinking, no, that happens in the Gift. That actually happens in the Gift. No, it happened to me yesterday. We were talking to someone about it. And I was like, no, not in Scorpion. It happens in the Gift.
So there's a homework assignment for all the Trek Profiles listeners out there. Go out and rewatch The Gift and gain a new appreciation for that. Per Ben, it's an underrated episode and an inflection point in all of Voyager.
And funnily enough, I'm going to now do a name drop. I had exactly the same conversation with Brandon Braga when we were doing the book. Brandon's going, well, The Gift, really? And I was like, yeah. The starting and he goes, oh, yeah, that is really good. Yeah, that did happen in that episode. Yeah. And Joe Manosky is one of the unsung heroes of Voyager, who was a massive part in making that show. It was. And I pretty much recommend you watch any Joe Manosky episode.
Yeah, you won't get any disagreement from me, sir. Talk about inflection points. This next episode, I think, is actually a major inflection point, but it comes pretty early in a series run, and that's The Butcher's Knife Cares Not for the Lamb's Cry, Discovery Season 1, Episode 4, or as I like to refer to it, the episode writers care not for the episode title's length, which is how I like to snarkily refer to it.
For the world is hollow and I have touched the sky. Yeah.
So in this one, of course, we have Ripper, the tardigrade, Rekha Sharma as Landry getting killed for the first of 3 times in the same show.
So far,
there might be more. Who knows? We have a little bit of L'Rell and Vogue romance budding early on. And of course, Burnham getting back into the uniform for the first time. So what is it about this episode that's particularly special to you, Ben?
Lorca. That was the episode in which I just thought, okay, this is interesting. This guy is different. This is great. I mean, there are lots of things to admire in season 1 of Discovery. Lots and lots and lots. But for me, Lorca, Jason Isaacs, is the greatest achievement of that first season.
Oh, no, that's a high statement right there.
It is. I mean, I'm being a little unfair because Sonequa, Michael Burnham is a fantastic character, and I think she's one of the most important characters in the history of Star Trek. But like I was saying, I love the idea that there were these other captains out there who were every bit as badass as Kirk. And Lorca is every bit as badass as Kirk. If Kirk and Lorca were going head to head, it would be like, I wouldn't know which one to put my money on. And he had that thing of like those ruined captains you see in the original series. Mm-hmm. Those captains who lost their crews. It did drive them a little bit crazy. That kind of self-belief turns a little dark and they're not quite, you think they're a little bit unhinged by it. And then, of course, in Lorca's case, you discover it's from the Mirror Universe, so he started out unhinged. But that's what that episode really did for me. And it brought back something that was there in the original series. The idea that people could be compromised and you wouldn't be 100% sure, that's one of the great things about that first season of Discovery is like, do you trust Lorca? Do you trust him? There are times when you so want him on your side.
Yeah.
You would, I would serve under him. I would be very happy to be serving under Lorca.
For what it's worth, as someone who's a veteran, I knew a lot of guys who were like that.
Exactly. And that's one of the other things that Gene kind of tried to undo about the original series is that it's a military ship. There are episodes in which Kirk says, I'm a soldier, not a diplomat. And that sense of, I haven't served, but that idea that there is a chain of command that people still call one another by their first names, whatever, that it had a kind of a sort of convincingness to it that felt like these were people who had served, and of course they had, a lot of them had. Gene certainly had, and Matt Jeffries had, and Jimmy Doohan had. I mean, Jimmy Doohan had a missing finger because of what happened to the beaches of Pino. Yeah, that was just Lorca just felt like this was a breath of fresh air, and it was going back to what Star Trek had been in the 60s, but with balls. And that was I was just so excited because that opened up possibility that had been closed down for a long time.
I'd agree with you. I was totally enraptured with the character. For me, it was a little bit of a disappointment that he was just a mirror universe bad guy.
Yeah.
I kind of wanted the story of like how this Starfleet guy got to be that way, and it turned out it wasn't that at all, and it wasn't satisfying for me. I mean, other people might have enjoyed that twist. I did not.
I really like the thought that the original, the original Prime Universe Lorca could still be out there somewhere.
I was on a podcast where we basically were doing Star Trek fantasy football, put together your dream crew. And my pick for captain was Prime Lorca, which no one expected, right? I could have picked, I think, like original Kirk, or I could have picked, Janeway or Cisco. I was early enough in the draft, and I was like, nope, I'm going for Prime Lorca. Everyone was like, what?
Yeah, well, I think I might be with you on that. I could well be with you on that. And Jason is great. And clearly would be very happy to come back.
So, Ben, if I may kindly say, you are not someone who's just starting out in your career. You've been working for a while. And it seems like you've had Star Trek in your life for quite a number of years, both personally and now professionally, with the work that you're doing with EagleMoss and the fantastic ships and fact files and all of these things. Why does Star Trek matter to you so much?
Well, obviously one answer is it helps pay the mortgage. There's a lot more to it than that.
An answer I've heard before.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely, there's a weird thing happens when you start to get paid to do something and it becomes a job. So, it's still something that you still love it, you still do it, but I still find myself, it is work. I'm very fortunate that that's what my work is. Not many people get to say that. But it is also, it's because it at least attempts to have meaning. It at least attempts to ask questions. It tries to explore things, and it doesn't, on the whole, offer you glib answers. But it has ideas. I'm big on ideas. I love an idea about almost anything. So those are probably the things. I mean, I don't know. It's interesting, isn't it? It's what is it, and why is Star Trek so much more enduring than so many other things? And I don't think there are any simple answers. I don't think it's any one thing.
I really keyed on the fact that you talked about how when you get paid for something, it changes how you interact with it. Because one of the things I have been very careful about on my show is that there's basically no way to support the show financially or to give me money for this. I don't have a supporters program. I don't even have ads on my website. I don't post affiliate links for anything. I don't accept donations. The only thing I do is every year I ask for a charity donation to a charity that's personally meaningful to me. That's it. But that doesn't go to me. It goes to a charity.
Sure.
And I've been very clear about that like the show will never have any financial component whatsoever. It's entirely out of pocket because I offer it for free on a take it or leave it basis.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like I want to make money from it because it sort of it changes the relationship that I have with the work on the show.
Yeah. I mean, what I found is what do you do to relax? I mean, that's what Star Trek was for me. For ages, it was like, okay, I can watch episode of Star Trek and I can think about it and I can enjoy it and I get away from everything. And then fix your work. It doesn't really work that way. It's like, I've been working all day. No, I'll watch an episode of Star Trek to relax. Oh, but there's a part of my brain that is like taking notes. And
I have to mention this at the meeting next week. And here's this thing we forgot about that affects that other thing.
Oh, we could do something with that. And I'd forgotten about that. And that's it. But on the other hand, work's not really work. I mean, it is work. I mean, I work very hard. I mean, I put in a lot of hours. Too many. But part of that is because I'm fortunate enough to do something that I love. But after 12 hours a day, 51 weeks a year, there's a point at which you're like thinking, I could just do with a break. Really good. But you can tell I am not a man who is not enjoying myself. So, but that it does change things.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, and more subtly, you become friends with people. I'm fortunate enough to there are a few people who worked on shows who I would consider to be among my closest friends now.
That's wonderful.
And they are wonderful people, I have to say. I mean, you start out getting to know them because they work on Star Trek, and then you discover that they're great. I wrote this book with Dan Curry. So Dan and I talked every weekend for a year, more, 18 months. And then the book's done, but we still talk most weekends, and Dan's an extraordinary person. I mean, Dan's kind of unbelievable, incredible person. Or Johnny Eves has, he's been so incredibly generous to us. And I was just actually talking to John before we started doing this. Or Ira Bear is one of the cleverest, smartest, funniest people I've ever met.
I have to tell you a very quick Ira story. I was going through some photos on my phone, and I had a picture of a coffee. And my wife and I were looking for something in my photos, and she's like, "Why do you have a picture of a coffee?" And I was like, "Oh, that's the coffee Ira Bear bought me." And she's like, "Well, she doesn't know anything about Star Trek, but she's like, who's that?" And at the Star Trek convention a few years ago, Ira, at one of his panels, he was in this thing called the CBS All Access Theater, which, if you remember, was kind of that one that was in the lunchroom.
I know that one well. I've been in there myself a few times.
Yeah, and Ira gets up there and he yells at the person at the back who's in the lunchroom, and he's like, "Hey, I want to buy a coffee for everybody here." And they're like, "Well, exactly how many coffees is that I need to put it in the register?" He's like, "I don't know, this many." and she's the person working at the register. She's just trying to do her job. I mean, but she literally didn't know what to put in the machine, and so she had like a technical issue. But he's like, "Just give everybody a coffee or a hot chocolate or something." And so Ira bought, every single person who went to his panel a drink. And so I took a picture of that coffee at Caesar's Palace, and I'm like, "That's the coffee that Ira bought me."
That's a very Ira thing to do. Equally capable of buying vodka.
Yeah. But, it's part of the venue, and you got to, do things But the thing that I want to ask you about is that, do you feel that as a fan, that your feelings about the show and maybe your reactions to certain things have changed because you're involved now with the people who are making it? I mean, do you feel you can evaluate it separately?
I think so. Anybody engaged in any creative endeavor, and, we write a lot, so I do consider that to be creative. You have to have this kind of funny kind of edge between the kind of egotism to think that people are going to want to hear what you have to say, and the self-criticism to make it better, to make it worth listening to. And that's one of the reasons I love writers, and there are other people who are on the writing stuff who I consider to be my real friends as well. And it's that combination of qualities that I find irresistible. But you have to maintain that critical facility in order to create anything. And you have to both love it and hate it equally. There's another Ira. I was talking to Ira once. We were saying, I went to visit these friends of mine, and they watch TV to relax. He said, "That's the least relaxing thing in the world." No, Ira, it's the least relaxing thing in the world for you, because you're looking at it and thinking, how could they have done that better? And most people just kind of switch off and watch it, and they don't, they don't take it in the same way you do.
Exactly.
So you have to be, critical. I have no time for people who are critical of things because they're not theirs. And I see a lot of that in fandom. And even amongst people who I'm very fond of. But people are like, "Oh, not my track." And it's like, and you're telling me that it's terrible. And I've watched it, and it's not terrible. I mean, there are terrible episodes of every incarnation of Trek, except Picard. There hasn't been a terrible episode of Picard yet.
Or Lower Decks, I would say.
Or Lower Decks. I was going to say, or Lower Decks. Mike, if you're listening, there hasn't been you need to go write a terrible episode. That objectiveness can actually lead you to sound a bit Pollyanna-ish as well when you look at how a lot of fandom behaves. There are a lot of people who are very ready to criticize things just because this isn't what Star Trek's going to be. Oh, it broke canon. Oh, it's not. And, I really don't have a lot of time for that. I think you have to look at something and say, is it any good? does it stand on its own merits, and to really be objective about that and not let your own emotional attachment to a particular era or style of Star Trek get in the way.
Wonderful. Well, Ben, I've enjoyed our conversation, but the M5 is signaling me that it's time for the Kobayashi Maru lightning round.
Okay.
The Kobayashi Maru is a challenging and difficult test, cunningly prepared by the M5. Should you not only survive the test, but pass it as well, the M5 will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our little podcast here. Are you ready, Ben?
Yeah, confronting a psychotic computer that has personality issues. Yeah, always ready.
M5, load the Kobayashi Maru simulation and prepare to record Ben's responses.
Simulation available.
Question 1. Best class, Miranda class or Oberth class?
Miranda.
Question 2. It's your birthday. Pineapple cake with Malcolm Reed or a 7-layer Jabalian fudge cake with Kess?
Oh, Jabalian fudge cake with Kess.
Question 3. Which cat is on your lap, Grudge or Spot?
Grudge.
Question 4. You've been taken captive and will be interrogated. Which would be worse? A week with Gul Madred or a trip to Cold Station 12 with the Augments?
Worse. Madred. Gul Madred. Horrible, man.
And finally, just for you, Ben, in a head-to-head battle to the death, which ship would hold the edge? A Klingon Vorcha-class cruiser or a Romulan Dederidex-class warbird?
Never actually been determined. I would... technically, it should be the Vorcha because it's a little more advanced and a little later, but my money's on the Romulans. Those Dederidex-class ships are pretty huge and badass.
Simulation complete. M5, please compute the results and tell us if our guest has passed the Kobayashi Maru.
Analyzing results.
I'll tell you a story about the Kobayashi Maru while we're waiting for the results.
Oh, sure.
The Kobayashi Maru was added to Star Trek 2 during the writing process, and originally it wasn't in the beginning. So the idea of actually showing you the test came about because they got leaked that Spock died.
Yeah.
So they were like, oh, everybody knows Spock died. So Nick Meyer, also a man I consider a friend, said, why don't we just kill him at the beginning of the film and then everyone would be confused? So they wrote in the scene at the beginning. And then later on, there's the scene when Kirk says, I changed the rules of the test, I cheated. And Harv said to Nick, I'm not, I don't think Kirk should cheat. I don't think it's admirable. It's not a good thing for him. And Harv said to me, and Nick turned to me and said, TV thinking. I always like that story.
Well, my favorite corollary to that is that they put in that line when Kirk meets Spock in the hallway outside the Kobayashi Maru. He says, "Aren't you dead?" Which is also a tweak for the fans, which was great.
Absolutely, and that's before the internet. That was...
Oh, yeah. I was, a kid, but I was definitely in the fandom at that time, and I remembered reading the magazines and talking with my friends before school, and we would eagerly devour, any little pre-publicity photo or anything that came out, and that certainly was floating around in the ether, and I was glad that they tweaked us in that way. I think that's part of that virtuous circle that exists between the fandom and the creatives we were talking about before. I like it when they tweak us like that.
But the desire to bring Spock back is also why Nick Meyer didn't direct Star Trek 3, because he felt that it betrayed the story. He said he was an idiot, but he said at the time, he was like, this is, everything about this film was about killing Spock. You can't just bring him back.
Well, that's the creative direction, right? They could have gone that way. I would have been very sad had they gone that way. I'm glad things turned out like they did, and I have a special spot in my heart for Star Trek 3. I think it's a fantastic film, and
it's got a lot to recommend it. There are a lot of good things in Star Trek 3. I don't think it. I mean, Star Trek 2 is such a high point in the history of Star Trek, and it's just the perfect... I mean, it's not perfect. There are things wrong with it, but it is as close to a perfect script as you can get. It's just an example of... I mean, Nick always says he wrote it in 2 weeks. And it's basically true. But then he did do some rewrites that made a big difference.
Sure.
But yeah, it's just a phenomenal script. It's a phenomenal piece of screenwriting that I think gets overlooked a bit because it's Star Trek.
Exactly. We'll never get the respect we deserve, my man. But I'm here to tell you that the M5 is going to give you the respect that you have earned. The M5 has calculated that you have passed the Kobayashi Maru simulation. Congratulations.
I didn't even have to reprogram it.
No, you didn't. Nor talk it into a logical fallacy to get it to shut down.
Or kiss it. That's the other thing. That droids and any android just kisses them. That's it. Smoke comes out of their ears. It's true. Go through the original series and see how many times he destroys an android by kissing it.
All right, I'm going to have to make that part of my next rewatch project. And now, the M5, who has analyzed your answers, will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our podcast. M5, what title shall we award our guest?
Ben is awarded the title of Chief of the Starship Design Bureau.
So there you go.
Oh, I'm very honored.
Ben, if people want to continue the conversation, how can they get in touch with you?
Twitter is probably the best place. Erratically, I have to admit, I spend most of my time working or regretting the work that I didn't manage to get done in any one given day. The list of things I haven't done is too long. But yeah, Twitter. So I'm going to say that I'm at Ben C.S. Robinson, which I'm fairly sure is true. But if you search for me on Twitter or for Hero Character, that's us. And I'm hoping we're going to be doing a bit more with our social this year. It's one of the things on the list. Have some nice ideas.
Oh.
And some stuff that would certainly involve a lot of Star Trek.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, we're looking forward to that. Ben, thank you so much for being part of Trek Profiles.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed myself. This has been one of the more enjoyable ways to spend an afternoon.
Here ends this installment of the Trek Profiles podcast. And before we offer a Trek quote to close this episode, I'd like to remind you that you may send us your songs of praise, your epistles of exquisite enmity, or videos of yourself singing Star Trek-themed sea shanties to feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter at Trek Profiles. Anything you send me may be used in the show, or it may be sent to the Packleds to make them strong, to make them go. Portions of the Kobayashi Maru questions from this very episode were submitted by listeners just like you. In this particular episode, we had questions from Adam Sanders and Abby Summer. If you'd like to have a go at sending in some questions of your own, please check the rules that I've posted over on TrekProfiles.com. And we thank Adam and Abby for their excellent questions. This episode, I leave you with a quote from Captain Janeway, who in the episode The Gift said, quote, "I've got an Ocampan who wants to be something more and a Borg who's afraid of becoming something less. Here's to Vulcan stability." Close quote. Thanks for listening, and live long and prosper.
This handcrafted podcast is brought to you by Stars and Sky Media Lab. It's cosmic.
The making stuff is, I wouldn't say it's exactly secondary, because obviously it's the reason why we do it. But, you know, I've been doing it, we've been doing it for a long time, and we're going to carry on doing it. So, you know, happy to shoot the breeze about Star Trek for sure.
One of the questions I didn't get to, but I'm just curious. I mean, do you feel like you're going to like exhaust the show at some point? I mean, you're making ships as fast as they're making shows, so
slightly less fast, by about 2 ships a year. I mean, we're in this kind of happy state now where, I mean, this year's been obviously because of COVID. 21 is going to have a lot less Star Trek in it than they originally intended. But you're reaching this kind of magical point where there should have been 4 Star Trek shows. There should have been 4 Star Trek shows on the air this year. Sorry, that's kind of weird. We should have had Picard Season 2, Lower Deck Season 2, Strange New Worlds Season 1, and Discovery Season 4. And they were all originally due out in 2021. And if each of those had 3 ships in, we would be fine. They would be able to carry on. There are still like concept ships and things like that. And there are still, some deep cuts that we can do. We've still got like the fleet ships from the 2009 JJ movie to do.
What's the deepest cut you've come out with so far, in your opinion?
Probably the wreckage from Wolf 359. I mean, the ships that were wrecked at 359, that's pretty deep. It rejected Excelsior concepts, some of which are in the wreckage of War 359, some of which are in Quailor 2. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty deep cut.
That is, I love it.
Or actually, I mean, another one, which is the never got made or never ended up on screen, to be more accurate, Matt Jeffries' redesign of the Enterprise for what would have been the Star Trek II TV series.
The Phase 2.
That got adapted. Yeah, I'm very picky about this. It wasn't known as Phase 2 at the time. We all call it Phase 2 now, but just to avoid confusion, because it was actually just known as Star Trek 2 on the production stuff. Yeah, that's pretty deep.
I always feel like one of the things we're lacking in Star Trek fandom is sort of what they have in comics, where they can talk about Silver Age and Gold Age. I think we need some good shorthand to talk about, the Gene era, the Berman era, the Kelvin films versus like the Kurtzman, without no judgment, but just like we don't have good legal code for that.
I think that's sort of become more necessary now, actually. Modern Trek, if you will. I mean, it's always the problem with comics. It's like, what's the modern age? When does that start? What age are we in now? Everybody knows what Golden Age and Silver Age, and then Bronze Age. Yeah, and then it gets a bit confused. It's like, okay, what's the post-crisis era? But yeah, with Trek, it's definitely an issue now, because we're even trying to do collections that are kind of based in those time periods.
Oh, right.
So if you're doing a collection that's only based on modern Star Trek, what's that called? There isn't a name for it.
Yeah, you're not going to call it the Kurtzman era, right?
No, exactly. I mean, not yet. I mean, maybe in 20, 30 years' time, we'll turn around and say, the Secret Hideout era or the Kurtzman era. But and it does have a different flavor, for sure. And I think the Berman era, that is kind of becoming established now. And I think everybody knows what Berman Trek means.
Somewhere around season 3 TNG through the end of Enterprise is the best way I could. That's roughly where I would put it.
Yes, I mean, but Roddenberry Trek. I mean, it's all Roddenberry, but Gene. I mean, Gene's ideas about what Star Trek were in the first 2 seasons of TNG versus the original series are quite different, I think.
Yep. We don't have a good nomenclature for this.
The fuck up.
We need to have a great fan conclave to like come together.
We should, yes, yeah, exactly. We should play the bull.